I remember there was talk about Princess Diana wanting to maybe move to America herself when she was alive. You know, she was quite a maverick. And I think in your book, Diana Closely Guarded Secret, it's not a memory test about your book, so I've written a little piece down. I think you described her as a heroine who broke free of royal bonds and changed the monarchy. Would she have supported Megxit? Would she have supported Harry saying to the royal family, "I don't want any of this. I'm taking my family abroad"? Or would she have looked at it as a bit of a betrayal to the institution that she still did love, despite all her problems?
I think what Diana would have been ahead of the game, and ahead of Harry's meeting with the late Queen in a sense, because she would have known exactly, what Queen Elizabeth would say. I mean, as we know, the Queen understood completely the problems that Harry and Meghan were experiencing. They wanted, they found the press an intrusion, they found the media intrusion, they valued their privacy. He couldn't find a way in the United Kingdom at that time, so therefore decided that he would leave. But he didn't realise at that point that the Queen was going to say, fine, we understand, but you can't have it both ways. You can't do a 6 month in, a 6 month out. We don't work like that. The monarchy has been running for hundreds of years. Suddenly to break out of that tradition wasn't going to work. Now, Diana would have anticipated that is exactly what the Queen would have said. And in that sense would have said, well, look, you've got to be careful here. I understand. But I think it would have been easier had his mother been around. Because the one thing that I think that Harry has lacked in the last 4 or 5 years, or the last 4 years, is real personal advice from close members of his family. And I think that's been part of the problem. I was always critical of perhaps some of the advice he's taken from outside of the royal family. I mean, notably, his book, Spare, I mean, we touched on it. It was always going to be a global bestseller because, no one member of the recent British royal family has written such a memoir. But, there were things that made the headlines in that publication were things that perhaps shouldn't have been included. His sort of early sexual activities in a pub garden in Gloucestershire, or the sort of the egoistic sort of line of, killing Afghans in his war in Afghanistan, because that, in essence, sort of produced a great deal of negative publicity. I think he tells a very convincing story about his life, which is of interest. But I think what he lacked was the proper advisor. And to come back to the beginning, Matt, I think this is where Diana would have been very influential.
In your experience, the claims that Harry has made about the royal family in Spare and on these TV shows where him and Meghan have both talked about racism, they've both talked about, or institutional racism rather than, they've kind of diluted their allegations recently, and talked about, a childhood. Harry paints a childhood where he kind of felt unloved by his father, and talks about breaking this cycle of pain. That's why he moved his family across. In your experience, when you were, as I say, so tight within the royal family, seeing them every single day, are the accusations that he made, is there any reality in that from your experience?
These are very serious statements to make on his part. I mean, from my part, working not only with Diana and William and Harry, I worked with every single member of the royal family over 16 years, and I never saw one hint of racism. Because they're not. The royal family are not racist. They represent the very best, in my view. I'm not saying they're perfect, but on this particular subject, no, they're not. And, quite what happened in Harry's case when, Archie was born, one can imagine a variety of discussions and leads within the royal family. But I wasn't there, so I'm not in a position to say what was said or what wasn't said. But in those discussions, I'm convinced that there was nothing with any real racial intent. And I think for that reason, this is where we come back to the advisors again, and people that are close to him, to say, well, hang on a minute, you know her, you know him, you know your father, you know that's not the case. So I think, again, it's a delicate subject for discussion. But personally, from my own experiences, I never witnessed any of it. On the contrary, I mean, it's not within their remit, their royal role. I mean, it's they want to embrace, a wider, society from all races. That's exactly what their role is. So I don't see that.
Fine. Now, as we've touched on a lot, you were, Princess Diana's bodyguard and for a short period of time, but also William and Harry's bodyguard. There's been a big court case. Prince Harry has taken the Home Office to court. He wants you. He wants someone like you. He wants a royal protection officer when he's in the UK.
Well, I'm not been approached. I'm open.
Would you do it?
Well, I'd love you to give advice on it. I mean, I'm probably too old now to do the job itself. But
the court case itself. I mean, he wants someone, not specifically you, but he wants a royal protection officer team when he's here in the UK to when he brings his family. And I think we discussed this before in the past. But is it a case of that he will get proper security and he is safe if he comes here, knowing what you know?
Yeah. Again, this is an unusual case that sadly he's now £750,000 to £1 million out of pocket as a result of this. And I think when you look at this case, it was never going to win in favour for him. And so, it goes back to the very question that we talked about earlier, Matt, that, who actually advised him to take this course of action? Yes, it becomes very much a celebrity event because it involves him, the question of protection. He's saying that his family need the protection because of what happened to his mother. I mean, here's a wide subject for discussion. But the most important thing here is that this government and the Metropolitan Police would never, ride away or abandon him coming to the United Kingdom because they know, although whatever the risk assessment would be, they would have a duty because of who he is and the connections with his father, the king of this country, to provide him with some sort of protection, which they would. And I know that's the case. They would provide him with a liaison officer to work in conjunction with his own security, to enable him to have access into places, government buildings, say, or royal palaces where, restriction is obviously, there's a restriction there. So he was never going to be left alone. And so in that sense, I was surprised again that he continued to pursue this action, because as a non-working member of the British royal family, living on the other side of the United States of America, I don't see how any one person can justify him giving the team that he wanted of, let's say, at least a team of 4 protection officers with access to a close protection team. That's just not acceptable. Acceptable on the grounds that it's not required. And secondly, it's not acceptable on the grounds of the cost to the public purse. And the judge found that in favour of that was the case. And equally, the government and the police have supported that action. But I think what Harry must realise is that he will never be left completely unprotected. He will always have somebody there to look after his best interest.